Hello, everybody. Welcome to Random Assignment. I am Bob Bowden. Another man is Corey DeAngelis. I'm coming from, by the way, the Lone Star State, which is a bit of a misnomer because here in Texas, there's not just a Lone Star. It turns out the stars at night are big and bright, which is
in the heart of Texas.
Yeah, the plural, like the stars, which means it's not a lone star. There really are lots of stars in Texas, but I'm being ridiculous. Corey, how are you doing?
Well, you know what, Bob? We keep kind of almost crossing paths because you were in Fort Lauderdale and you got to hang out with Patrick Wolf from the University of Arkansas, one of my co-authors, before I got there. And then you made sure to get out of town right when I got there. And then last week I was in Austin only for one night. I testified on a couple of bills that passed out of committee, both of them a 9-0 vote. We'll go over those in a second, but and now you're in Austin hanging out without me.
After hitting a watering hole with Professor Patrick Wolf, I really didn't have anything left for any more drinks with anyone else. Yeah, please, we only have so much capacity.
Yeah, I kind of feel bad. I wasn't there. I was stuck in the DC airport for 12 hours because there was only one storm kind of hovering on the panhandle of Florida, and it was pretty much the only place you couldn't fly into the entire day. And they kept telling me, oh, well, if you wait 15 minutes, you wait 15 minutes, you wait 15 minutes. Oh, well, it's going to clear up. It's going to clear. Never really cleared up. It just kind of kept coming and coming from the Gulf side. And I ended up getting to the hotel like 1:30 in the morning, almost missing. Because my presentation was that morning at like 9 or 10 a.m. And so I was able to sleep, but I was this close to saying, you know what, I'm just going back home. I'm not going to do it.
Oh, yeah. But as the viewers watching can see, I've decided on a near Corey DeAngelis-like approach to shaving. So we'll see how that goes.
I thought you were going to mention your new equipment. You have better camera going on.
I do. I have A7R III 42 megapixel Sony camera for those scoring at home. So that's the.
I think you got me beat.
Hey, please, the video doesn't even need anywhere near that level of resolution. It's ridiculous.
All right, so what is this title about? COVID relief funds being used for non-COVID expenses. Why would that ever happen? Who would have ever guessed that was going to happen when we we're nearing a request of up to $350 billion to K-12 education? Who would have guessed that after the CBO estimated that we would only spend 5% of the American Rescue Plan K-12 dollars this year? Who would have guessed that we would have had schools being pressured to spend money on non-COVID related things?
And I believe the number was only 26% the first 2 calendar years. It was something like 3/4 of the money would be spent after 2022. So that was just the CARES Act. Of course, there were several other federal giant programs. Yeah, the news COVID money, it's almost an analog to the old thing of, the old, chestnut of, you say it's for the kids, but it's really for the adults. Here, you say it's for COVID, but it's really not for COVID. So there's a story out of San Diego which kind of makes this point. And, this is presented as a headline as if it's some kind of surprise. A lot of our regular viewers and listeners will be profoundly not surprised by this information. Of the nearly $178 million in coronavirus aid funds, because, coronavirus is a dangerous health crisis, Corey. We need money to keep you from dying from coronavirus. If you're against this, you're for coronavirus death, right? Yeah. In other words, so this is important for public health. Oh, look. Wow, look, almost 90 million, 51% went to employee pay and benefits, which just gives people bonuses, just gives people salary increases, pay raises. Because, the virus hates people getting pay raises. If you give them a raise, if a third grade teacher has a significant raise this year over last year, she's considerably more protected from COVID. This is more or less what we were asked to believe. But so evidence to the contrary.
Well, you know what, Bob, we should have known this from the get-go when we saw all the private schools pushing to reopen, the public schools kicking the can down the road, using their position to lobby for more money. And, they already had tons of money. You look at Los Angeles public schools in California. Georgetown University estimated recently that they're going to see a surplus of about $500 million. And they essentially went remote throughout most of the past year. I don't know if they're still remote in Los Angeles. They may be talking about reopening in the fall or something. But
yeah, so add to that all this sort of incredible largesse of federal money coming into these public schools from programs that can't even figure out how to spend all the money. Add to that what our friend Mike Petrilli of Fordham Institute pointed out, Thomas B. Fordham Institute. He says that look at all the national stories about the huge increase in real estate prices. This could, through if there are revaluations of real estate prices, and a lot of property tax money, of course, goes to schools, that if schools districts, in other words, could find themselves with another giant increase in funding simply because of increased housing prices once the local governments reval those houses, and they're now worth so much more. And now, therefore, the taxes automatically just become so much more unless action is taken to change the rate. You'll see that as yet another effect that will end up causing districts to have still more money, which further weakens the argument of school choice drains money from district schools, as if drains money from district schools is a problem these days. They're just overflowing with money. Instead of tripling the money per student, they'll only 2.5 times the money per student. I'm exaggerating for effect, but the idea is that the claim that school choice must be stymied or limited or prevented because of this terrible consequence of draining money from additional public schools. It's hard to argue that in these eras of COVID largesse.
Well, did you see the whole thing about Zoom in a room in California, where it's kind of like the thing where they were opening the schools remotely and saying it wasn't safe enough, but we'll do the daycare, we'll charge you out of pocket for the daycare. Well, now what they're doing in California school districts, like in San Francisco and I believe Los Angeles as well, I think San Francisco was the major story, where they have this thing called Zoom in a room, where the kids go into the room instead of being at home, and instead of Zooming from their home, they Zoom from the classroom while the teacher stays home, and a childcare worker comes in from the private sector and watches the kids in class. So it's like, if it's safe enough for the childcare worker to go into the same school building with the same kids, why isn't it safe enough for the public sector employee to go into the room? So I found stories about this from San Francisco. This was happening, and Los Angeles Times wrote about this too. Their headline was, when Los Angeles Unified School District reopens schools, K-8 students will spend more time in childcare than class. So it's a continued story about how even when, back months ago and all across the United States, the schools were opening for childcare work, with childcare workers coming in, but not the teachers. And we're seeing more of that primarily in California right now.
And as I always want to add to these stories, remember, these are teachers who insisted on prioritization for vaccinations, because we have to be vaccinated first, because it would be just absolutely cruel to not vaccinate us. High priority. So once they secure that high priority vaccination list status, what do they then do? Not show up to class, right? I mean, it's more of the same. All right. So let me about a well-known U.S. senator from the state of Kentucky named Rand Paul, because he had a suggestion that it's not a brand new idea. This idea of taking Title I money, which is federal funds directed to help low-income students. It goes to districts based on their number of low-income students. And he says, why don't, instead of that, giving them to the districts, what if we, to quote one philosopher, fund students, not systems? That's what Senator Rand Paul says, and we have a clip.
Let's check it out.
Kentucky's U.S. Senator Rand Paul was in South Covington today to pitch his new school choice bill. Paul visited Calvary Christian, a private religious school, to discuss the new proposal. It would allow low-income families to use federal and state funds under the Title I program to attend private and religious schools. Now, the senator says it will create healthy competition and help all schools get better.
This is an idea that there are government funds out there already, and they follow poor kids to poor districts. I'd like them to follow the student where the student wants to go. So if you have a poor child in your community or in Northern Kentucky and they want to come here and they can't afford it, that tax dollar is already following them to a public school. I'd let them follow them to a private school.
Kentucky Republican state legislature recently overrode a veto by Democratic Governor Andy Beshear to enact a more restrictive version of school choice in the state.
Boom.
So-
Rand Paul.
There you have it. It's well, you know, we I guess it's important to say that bill of this nature probably has somewhere around 0% chance of passage in the current configuration of the U.S. Congress, and about 0% being signed by the current president of the United States if it were to pass the Congress of the United States. Nevertheless, it's an idea that's out there, and it's an idea we talk about a lot. But when local news is covering this stuff, is one, you know, we weren't seeing this before this year that much. We weren't seeing it before 2020. We weren't seeing local news covering school choice bills that were, you know, in U.S. Congress or you know, that much. Sometimes a state bill they'd cover more, but this kind of thing, a federal bill, usually would not have been in the local news, and now it is.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I think this one's called the School Act, where it would reallocate nearly all existing federal education dollars from buildings to students. And yeah, it's great that Rand Paul is spreading the idea, even if it's has pretty much a near zero a chance of passing. And I'm glad they also pointed out that school choice hypocrite Andy Beshear got an override on his veto of the school choice bill out there in Kentucky. That recently passed, and it will be the second most expansive education savings account program in the country. It'll be right behind West Virginia's new bill that was signed into law pretty recently, which will be the biggest, most expansive education savings account program in the country.
Now, briefly remind us, Chorus, why would you just be asserting that the governor of the great state of Kentucky would be a hypocrite? It's not, I mean, right? It's not like his own kids go to private school, or it's not like he himself went to private school.
Yeah, he would never do that. He's a proud product of public education. He said that over and over again. He also said that he's a proud graduate of public schools, but he never mentioned, for some reason, that he attended private schools himself. I uncovered the yearbook through a Twitter account. Actually, sent me his yearbook. I didn't even find this one on Ancestry.com, so I got a little help from my friends on Twitter to expose that. I think it was the day before the override vote, or maybe if it was even the day of the override vote. But that kind of blew up in his face. But then also in 2019, it was uncovered that he sent his own kids to private school too, which both of these things are great. It's great that his parents had that opportunity. It's great that he had that opportunity for his kids, but he shouldn't try to close the door behind him and prevent others from having that opportunity.
All right. What do you got? Your turn.
Well, you did a video of Rand Paul pretty much preaching the to support of funding students as opposed to systems. I got a pretty good one too from Republican Senator from Florida, Manny Diaz Jr., who's been on my Educational Freedom Institute podcast pretty recently. He was a primary sponsor of this bill that just passed the Florida legislature yesterday, and they're calling it the biggest expansion of private school choice in U.S. history. So this is a pretty expansive bill. Governor DeSantis is expected to sign it, and it passed pretty easily through the House and the Senate. But here's one money quote from Senator Manny Diaz from Florida.
We should be in the business of funding students, not institutions.
Just had to pull a real quick argument from him. I like that the conversation is changing. Instead of just saying, school choice, it's more so, what are we talking about? We're talking about having the money follow the child. And I like that kind of framing a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we were talking California, so I wanted to point some people to AEI, American Enterprise Institute's Return to Learn tracker. So there's a lot of different trackers out there on school reopening plans. But if you want to see where the country is when it comes to reopening, I will say, for the most part, the vast majority of school districts, public school districts across the United States, are open in person at least part-time. I think they should all pretty much all be open for full-time in-person instruction 5 days a week for families who want that option. But most families do not have that option right now. If you look at the green, that is the full-time in-person instruction. It happens to be under 50% at the moment. Yeah. But what's really cool is if you want to look at your state, they have little state rankings, and you can look to see where your state falls. California has the highest percent that has no in-person instruction at all. It's about a fifth of their school districts. And this is through April 12th, I want to say. So it might be updated a little more since then. New Jersey, where you live, Bob, is the second worst state as far as in-person instruction.
What we see a lot of times is even in the districts where they finally get enough pressure to open up somewhat, you'll get these headlines trumpeting the heroism of these teachers for going back to school. And what you find out is, once you read the fine print, Jersey City, for example, I believe the second largest district in New Jersey, did just this. They were completely closed until as of about 2 weeks ago. Then there's this headline, New Deal struck, schools will open. You had to read down and find out they're still opening for only some students 4 days a week. So they're holding back full opening as a negotiation tactic to get yet more, goodies, whatever it is, whatever they want, salary, benefits, whatever they choose to use their negotiating power on. But in other words, these oftentimes to the public, they'll feel like, oh, everything's fine, it's all reopening. And we'll find is the unions, it's almost like they want to just open up a tiny increment at a time.
Give me a little more.
Holding back for the next negotiation. Yes, exactly.
It's exactly well. That's what they did in Chicago too. They're all celebrating how they finally opened their high schools for, I believe, 4 days a week for some. I don't know if it's some or all students, but it's like, come on, give me a break, dude. It's been over a year. You should have done this a long time ago. Stop patting yourselves on the back so much.
And remember, before all that, they opened just the elementaries, just to get, look, we'll make this concession of just these grades.
They wouldn't even do that. And they wouldn't even do that for the special needs kids either at the beginning. They wouldn't do it.
Right. There's always yet another tiny increment from which they can elicit more concessions.
Well, and they already got their ransom payment. They already got their ransom payment from the federal government. That's going to be paid out through 2020.
But there's always something else to get, right? There's always something else to get. So on this, since you brought up COVID, let me just talk about the Detroit story, going back, I guess, to the COVID thing a little bit, where they're offering $500 for their employees to be vaccinated. Okay, so when you hear, so the vaccines are free. Okay, so to everybody, 100% free. Now, if you look at every other industry that I know of, there's no one paying their employees to be vaccinated. Like the hospitals weren't paying nurses to be vaccinated, and the grocery stores weren't paying grocery store workers to be vaccinated, and nobody else is paying anybody else to be vaccinated. But for some reason, you feel like you're a Detroit district, and you say like, we got all this money coming, we got to blow this money somehow.
We got to spend it, or we're going to lose it.
Yeah, and we've already talked about other districts where suddenly there was money just for childcare, whether you needed it or not. You just got extra money if you had a kid. And so even if grandma kept the kid and you didn't need to pay for childcare at all, you still got the money. Things like this are happening where they're just learning new ways to spend. In this case, paying someone allegedly to protect their own health.
Did this happen in Los Angeles too? A childcare kind of thing?
I think that was the district with the childcare story we did 2 weeks ago, actually. But anyway, I just saw this. I'm like, why is this happening? What other industry is paying their workers to be vaccinated? It's an outrage. I mean, ultimately, you could say the money's being printed by federal printing presses. So I guess who cares, right?
Yeah, there's no
one's really paying for it.
Yeah,
it's free money. Free money. It's raining from the sky, which is another way to describe expansion of our money supply. Like it's all just free. Or if it's not free, then it's from, I don't know, we're lending, we're not just printing it, we're selling bonds to the Chinese, right? So some future generation will pay, not us. It's free for now. Great. Okay. I mean, I understand the unions love this stuff. But
nothing is free. Someone's always paying for it. It just happens when you get to pay the things to the taxpayer. We get to pay for it, not the employees, employers, or the customers. it's this third party problem. That's why we spend more and more each year in the school system. But yeah, here's that story from LA. Los Angeles teachers will get childcare stipend for young kids.
Yeah. Right.
What about
so
us?
in Detroit, let's pay them for getting a vaccine. In LA, we'll pay them if they have a 3-year-old, no matter whether they need any childcare or not. It's just kind of like, what's next? Pay them to get a new car. I don't know. Like pay them to, I don't know, pay for their vacations. I don't know what it's just like. Well, we just got all this money. So it's clear. In other words, you could at least make some plausible argument if they were using it to hire all these new teachers and they were using it for the laptops going for the kids. And you had all these stories there. It seemed remotely education related. You could make some plausible argument that there'll be increased learning somehow out of all this. No, not the case. Oh, you got the vaccine for free? Here's some money.
Well, they've overplayed their hand, and I want to go over some new data points to support my case that are in your case too, that we've been making, that the teachers unions kind of, by keeping schools closed for so long and by showing people their true colors and by showing the public that they don't really care about their customers all that much in a lot of places. Support for school choice is on the rise, and the latest poll from Harvard University among young America's youth found a huge uptick in support for educational freedom since 2019, 2 years in a row. And that just came out, I want to say I saw it like a week ago, or maybe it was just a few days ago, actually. But here's the top line finding. The question said, and I quote, "If parents had more freedom to choose where they could send their children to school, the education system in this country would be better." And that, in 2019, the percent of people that agreed with that statement was only 38% compared to 22% disagree. And this is
still a majority. Still a majority.
It's
meaning a relative. I should say majority, plurality. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's like 1.7 times the amount of the disagrees. So it's much more agrees in 2019. And why doesn't this add up to 100%? Because there's about a third each of the times that either refuse to answer or disagree. And I recalculate those as well a little later. But in 2020, that jumped to about 42% agree. And then 2021 jumped all the way to 49% agree. This is a nationally representative survey of America's youth ages 18 to 29. And I believe so. If you scale this and do 49 plus 18 divided by, or 49 divided by the sum of those two numbers, I believe it's about 73% support, net support. And if you did that in 2019 with these numbers, it's about 63%. So it's about a 10 percentage point jump in support for educational freedom, according to this Harvard University poll among youth ages 18 to 29. And they had crosstabs for different political affiliations and age groups and gender. And the support was pretty dang consistent with all of these different types of backgrounds and race as well. I had another tweet where I went over that. But this comes in addition to the Real Clear Opinion Research polling, also suggesting about a 7 percentage point jump in support for school choice from 64 to 71% from April of 2020 to March of 2021. And then my third bit of evidence is from EdChoice. They did similar nationwide polling through Morning Consult, a third party, and they found huge jumps in support for education savings accounts, tax credit scholarship programs, voucher programs, and charter schools. So essentially every type of school choice, there's been a jump in support over the past year. And then, of course, we have all of the evidence from the bills that are going through different states, which I can hit on.
And for example, the U.S. Census Bureau numbers on homeschooling, which we've covered in previous shows, that have took big jumps upward in the last 13 months or so with the COVID era. I want to bring something. So to the great chagrin of fans of Random Assignment, and I think the nation, we took last week off. There was no Random Assignment podcast and live stream last week. And, people are trying to, that's why we're live now, to try to help people get over that.
Yeah, we got to do a 3-hour show.
Yeah. So, But one of the things that would have aired last week, which I'd like to air now, is that the HBO host Bill Maher started talking about COVID and how the media had gotten so much wrong about COVID, and specifically about schools and politics and what the media has been saying about COVID. So Bill Maher said this on HBO about a week and a half ago.
And we do know conservatives have some loopy ideas about COVID, like the third of Republicans who believe it couldn't be spread by someone showing no symptoms. But what about liberals? You know, the high information, by the science people? In a recent Gallup survey, Democrats did much worse than Republicans in getting the right answer to the fundamental question, what are the chances that someone who gets COVID will need to be hospitalized? The answer is between 1% and 5%. 41% of Democrats thought it was over 50%. Another 28% put the chances at 20 to 49. So almost 70% of Democrats are wildly off on this key question and also have a greatly exaggerated view of the danger of COVID-2 and the mortality rate among children. All of which explains why today the states with the highest share of schools that are still closed are all blue states. So if the right-wing media bubble has to own things like climate change denial, shouldn't liberal media have to answer for, how did your audience wind up believing such a bunch of crap about COVID?
He's right.
Not the first time on this program we've talked about politics and school reopening, as Bill Maher is referring to blue states being less likely to have open schools. And we've talked about that many times before, and you've published research on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was crazy, the polling results that he shared, where only 1% to 5% of people need to be hospitalized if they get COVID. What did he say it was? Like, people guessed like
41% of Democrats thought it was over 50% chance of being hospitalized if you had COVID.
Oof.
So, and then another 28. So almost 70% of Democrats thought there was a very high chance of going to the hospital if you had COVID, when in fact it's a really low chance of going to the hospital if you have COVID. So he's basically blaming media disinformation for that lack of understanding and noting how politically, this is health information. Like, why does your political affiliation have anything to do with what you think about it? If basically it's the two genres of media sources are the cause for people thinking different health information, right? This is not something about what you think tax rates should be. This is not something like what you think defense policy of the U.S. should be, or I don't know, something like food stamp policies in your state or whatever. Like, this is something about just health data. So unless people are conducting experiments in their own home laboratories, odds are they're getting their assumptions about COVID from their media sources, which are clearly disseminating utterly disparate sets of
I think
facts.
Social media had a lot to do with it too, not just mainstream media. I mean, like,
fair enough.
Like,
fair
you
enough.
know what? Things can go viral on Twitter, for example, and it may seem things may freak you out, when you first see it. And I was pretty freaked out too, scrolling through Twitter when all of this started about a little over a year ago.
Oh, sure.
So
sure.
I could see how that can fuel these kind of sentiments, but it's also the mainstream media doing it too, with picking certain headlines to get more clicks and picking certain stories to highlight and not others.
Elsewhere in that commentary, for example. Elsewhere in that commentary, Bill Maher showed how in other countries around the world, there is information that's balanced about COVID, good and bad. Whereas uniquely in the United States, the mainstream media sources in the US, it's almost all bad news stories about COVID. So virtually every headline was about some sort of new location where at a restaurant COVID had spread, or some sort of story about, a school that was closed down because 3 kids all got COVID, or a story about these people that died, or this sort of increase in mortality over here, or new risk of a new variant might come along. Like, it was all negative, unlike everywhere else in the world of at least the industrialized countries.
Well, and then a lot of it was presenting the cases, or like the raw numbers and not the rates. And it's like, well, don't we want to know,
please.
right? I mean, 'cause
Please.
One is more horrific than the other, right?
Oh,
It makes it
please.
seem more horrific than the other.
My governor, Phil Murphy of New Jersey, posted. One of the first things that triggered me about COVID, Corey, was I saw him in a live press conference pull up charts that were of COVID deaths, and it had in little parentheses. I have to screenshot it. He had in little parentheses cumulative. He was charting a bar chart over time of cumulative COVID cases. That's the best way to make a problem that's actually going down seem like, to the uninitiated, to maybe people that are not careful enough to even know what that word means, it makes it seem like the COVID deaths are going up because it's a cumulative chart. I saw that thing, and this is supposed to be a data guy, former Goldman Sachs CEO, showing a cumulative chart of COVID deaths over time. And I was incensed by that. I just thought, well, thank you for telling me to never trust anything else you put out about this. There's just no excuse for that sort of disinformation. It's sophistry.
You remember that Washington Post article that I tried to get corrected, and the editor responded back to me saying like, "Oh, this was his opinion" or something, and it was the person was mad about individuals wanting to open the schools, right? And the journalist, I don't know if it was a journalist, but maybe an opinion writer at the Washington Post, had said something like, that teacher obituary, the disproportionate number of teachers represented in obituaries was horrifying or something like that. But they used the word disproportionate to suggest that teachers were dying at much higher rates than any other profession. No evidence for that. The only evidence that exists on that topic, and there's a few studies here and there, suggests, if anything, it's the opposite, that they had lower mortality risks.
And didn't they have some sort of comical excuse for once you called them on that? They had some sort of.
They said it was
convoluted.
It was their
excuse.
opinion on the matter, and it's like, no, dude, you made an objective. It was a subjective interpretation or something. They said, and I said, no, this is an objective statement that you made, that they are disproportionately represented in obituaries. No evidence for that. Yeah. But anyway, that's just a one-off thing that I remembered. So we did skip last week, so I want to go over a video of what I was actually doing last week in Austin. But before that, really quickly, I want to give a rundown on the bills that have just passed. So I already talked about Florida. There'll be a huge expansion. Tens of thousands of additional students just passed yesterday through the legislature. It should be signed by DeSantis pretty soon. We have Montana's Senate last night. Their Senate passed the bill to expand their tax credit scholarship program. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, we just found out yesterday, he signed a bill into law. Their House had just enough votes to get it passed. It was passed 52-40. They needed a 51 constitutional majority to pass it, but they got 52-40 in Arkansas. And it's going to be a small program. I think it's going to be about 250 kids can use it in the first year. But at least they'll have something passed in Arkansas. And I think as we're speaking, there's testimony going on in South Carolina on an education savings account bill. And tomorrow we're expecting there might be a vote in Nebraska on a tax credit scholarship bill. So that's kind of the quick update of the states. And at least 4 or 5 states have already signed bills into law. West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, South Dakota had a small expansion signed into law, and Indiana passed a pretty massive expansion, which the Wall Street Journal wrote about through their state budget. So that's a pretty good amount of states, and they're still moving throughout legislatures as we speak.
Yes. Isn't there a North Carolina update, or did you give that and I missed it?
North Carolina, no. Did they pass it through one chamber? Or?
Well, it looks like an expansion bill is what it looks like. I'm not saying an update meaning a passage, but
so let's
anyway,
see.
so maybe, yeah.
They have, I have it in my EFI tracker right now.
Yeah. North Carolina lawmakers debating an expansion of the scholarship program that would raise the value of the scholarship and potentially maximum annual income to qualify. On April 13th, which is maybe since our last show. I'd have to check the dates. The House passed HB 32 in a party line vote, 69 to 49. The Senate has now introduced its own version of the expansion with Senate Bill 671. So we'll see what happens in North Carolina.
Yes, I'm seeing that too, and it's in the Senate right now. I don't have an update on the Senate side, but their governor, Roy Cooper, has been known to be anti-school choice, even though he sent his own kids to private school.
Although he signed a bill after it was clear his veto would have been overridden in the past. So he can be, I don't know what you call that in political lingo, but
we'll see what happens. Is what we call
is that realpolitik? Is that cajoling? Is that something? At any rate,
let's check out what was going on in Austin last week. So just a preface, there's this bill in Austin. It is kind of like an education savings account. It's Senate Bill 1716 by Senator Larry Taylor. And it is $1,500 for special needs students in K through 12 education in public schools.
Not a lot.
In public schools. It's in public schools. So it would be funded through federal relief funding.
Say that last part again. It's in public schools.
For kids who are enrolled in public schools. You can't, it's not I wouldn't really call it a school choice program because you can't choose another school. You can't choose a private school to take that money to. You can't just do full-time homeschooling. You can't do a full-time private micro school. You have to be enrolled in the public school.
It's important distinction, but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is additional kind of expenses for students with special needs, but you had lobbyists from the other side that actually came out and testified against it. And one, they didn't really know what the heck they were talking about. They were calling it a voucher bill, which it is absolutely not. You can't use it to go to private schools. And then two, they were outright defending, and their whole argument was that they wanted the money to go to the buildings and not the kids, even though it's their own customers. And what I said during testimony that's not included in this clip is that the analogy I used was, I said, imagine if HEB paid lobbyists to come out here today to
HEB being a supermarket chain in Texas.
Yeah. I'm familiar with it because I grew up in Texas, and you probably know about it too because you're there right now. But biggest supermarket chain in Texas, and I said, imagine if they paid each of their or there was a bill in the legislature that paid each of their HEB customers $1,500 a year to be part of their loyalty program. It would be absolutely ridiculous for them to pay lobbyists to come out and testify against that bill and to try to say, oh, well, that money should come directly to HEB, not our customers.
Yeah.
I mean, that would look bad. It wouldn't make any sense. Yet that's what you had the other side doing in this little clip. And the AFC Texas team put this together. Here, come check it out. It's pretty short.
Luke, I'm with the Coalition for Public Schools, and I'm here to testify against Senate Bill 1716. If you start with a foot in the door and you transfer any public funds to a private entity like that, it could lead to a greater amount of vouchers.
You would be willing to give up the $1,500 stipend if it goes to a parent of a public school student. To be clear, that's what the bill is today in front of you.
Right.
Okay.
Regrettably, this piece of legislation is not a solution that we support because it does not put emphasis on serving students in the classroom.
You would say that in priority that the desires of the institution of education should exceed the needs of the education of the students. Between the two is that the focus should be on the institution of education as opposed to focus on the needs of the kids.
So we definitely would support any supplemental special ed resources to rural communities to help those public schools serve those students.
So your sentence there at the end sounds a lot like the bill. It's a direct stipend for specific needs for specific or challenged kids. So I don't know how anyone can stand up there and advocate in good conscience the way you just did and said, but we don't want it if it don't go this way. This $1,500, were we willing to give it up to the bureaucracy rather than help? It doesn't ring true.
Education funding exists to meet the needs of students, not to prop up and protect a particular institution. People are calling this a voucher bill, but it's not a voucher bill. It is money that follows the student as long as they're still enrolled in the public school system. Why would anybody be against that? Doesn't make any sense. Why would
I
you
like
be?
how they did the scrolling text there during. That's a nice, yeah. Well done. Good for you. Yeah.
I didn't make it, but someone did a good job on it.
Well, good for you going there.
But so that passed at a committee 9-0 vote. Both parties voted for it.
Good. So I wanted to bring up some, I guess, distressing news. So Seth Andrew is a well-known in the charter school community nationally. He founded a charter school called Democracy Prep in New York City. By virtually all accounts, an exceptional set of schools, not just one. There's a bunch of campuses for Democracy Prep, and I believe it's expanded beyond just New York City. And there was just today, breaking today, some information that he'd been arrested, and I just thought it was important to show it. Now, in full disclosure, I know Seth Andrew. I went and interviewed him several years ago, and I've seen him since at conferences here and there. They describe him, by CNBC that is, describes him as a former Obama White House advisor. I would say nationally known charter school founder, Seth Andrew, but he, I guess, was accused of stealing over $200,000 from the charter school, Democracy Prep, and it's my understanding he'd moved on from Democracy Prep to after founding the school, he had now moved on to other pursuits. He's involved in a higher education initiative that I know of. So, of course, there's a presumption of innocence in the United States, and so we want to mention that. And it's hard to know too much about this case, except for the fact he's been accused of stealing funds, which is pretty distressing. Now, of course, school choice opponents will take stories like this and say, see there, look at all the corruption and fraud in the school choice or charter school sector, well, ignoring the fact that there are many more stories like this all the time in traditional public schools of principals who steal and superintendents who steal in traditional districts, that is, all the time. And those are, of course, roundly omitted and ignored by those choice opponents. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring it up. Do you know Seth?
I think he follows me on Twitter, but I don't think I've met him personally before. So yeah, I don't want to comment too much on.
How can we comment?
Yeah. So there's this case, and we'll keep everybody updated, see what happens with it. But yeah, you're right that the other side is going to use this and say, look, this is a huge problem with charter schools, but then won't share the other side of the coin where this happens in traditional schools too.
Huge, by the way. And when it does, Chicago, sorry, go ahead.
Well, when it does happen, it should be called out, whatever sector it is, charter, absolutely, private, or public, or traditional.
Absolutely. And by the way, huge Chicago multi-million-dollar scandal. I don't know if you've been following that, but just if you compare the scope of these scandals, I think it was $17 million involved in the Chicago scandal. I don't know. Maybe we hadn't discussed this before, Corey. Can you Google this and pull it up real quick?
Let's see.
It's a Chicago superintendent in a money scandal. I could have my $17 million figure wrong, but
is it close? Well, is it recent?
Yeah, it's pretty recent. If not,
Chicago superintendent. I'm seeing stuff from like 2020.
Okay.
Ex-superintendent Eddie Johnson, maybe?
No. Oh, good. These live moments, they make it exciting for the audience.
A lot of stuff. There's too many stories of scandal in Chicago.
It's like the one scandal in Chicago.
What would you Google? Public school fraud, maybe? I'm seeing something from Florida popping up, though. Broward County superintendent. That's the top thing that's popping up on my Google.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Well, I don't know. I guess
suburban school CEO pleads guilty. Chicago. I don't know, Bob. You made it up.
Maybe I'm off.
Maybe it was on Chicago.
Yeah. I do see former Chicago Public Schools chief sentenced to 54 months in prison on a 2017 story, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that I was talking about. But we'll We'll find out soon. We'll update people on a future podcast.
So what's going on in Broward County, Florida?
Yeah, right. So that's another such example. We have, so this is involves the superintendent of the school district where the tragic Parkland, Florida shooting happened. And, our friend Max Eden did a whole book on this. For those who think that the school shooting story in Parkland, Florida was just a story about one very troubled and homicidal kid, for those who think it's just a story about that boy and it's not a story about school districts and school districts corruption, really, need to look at more about the story about the Parkland superintendent, who apparently has now been accused of perjury. So in keeping with our principle of the assumption of innocence, like we mentioned with Seth Andrew, I guess this superintendent deserves that as well. But nevertheless, he has been charged with perjury, and it has to do with the allegation is that he was trying to cover up the mismanagement of the school and the safety concerns around this case by contacting witnesses and getting them to allegedly change what they might say, etc. So this is very much a story about, for those who say, oh, school choice is terrible because these unaccountable private schools are it's the Wild West. We have the Wild West example item exhibit 1 million for district schools here, of district schools proving lack of accountability with, at least in this case, an allegation that the superintendent was trying to cover up what was not just a story about one very troubled child, but a story about district mismanagement.
So I wanted to pull up, I mentioned earlier on that Harvard poll that I had crosstabs for different backgrounds of students, America's youth, in that 18 to 29-year-old survey that just came out, and it was for spring 2021. Here are the numbers for different racial and political backgrounds. It's pretty dang consistent, near 50%, around 50% agree, and then about 20% or less for disagree with the statement that parents should have more freedom to choose their children's education. Mm-hmm. So Democrat, Republican, Independent, every single racial background as well.
Sure.
So this shouldn't be a partisan issue.
No, it's a fissure in the Democratic Party is what it is. Let's face it. It's often white liberals against minority Democrats in that civil war in one political party, I guess you could say. But not that said, plenty of Republicans have opposed school choice along the way too. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the great state of Texas, where you and I both spent some of our childhoods. Where I'm in right now, it's well known for a long time. Our friend Matt Ladner talks about Lucy and the Football, a Peanuts cartoon reference, where don't get excited about Texas passing school choice. Matt Ladner would say it's like Lucy and the Football. You keep thinking they're about to do it, and they pull the football away at the last minute. Why? Because a lot of small town Republican state legislators have little fiefdoms of power that hand jobs out in the little local public school district wherever they are, and they seem to have more fealty and more allegiance toward that little government job center than they might to some of the families who need other options.
Yeah. Speaking of Texas.
Okay.
Unless you want to show a video first. Bob?
You're asking me? Yeah, actually, I was going to go and I mentioned we don't talk a lot about, we don't talk enough about interdistrict school choice, which is in some places, it's usually limited where districts have to agree to participate, and then oftentimes they're held harmless if kids leave the district by getting money from the state so that they don't oppose the program, et cetera. But I wanted to show a clip from Missouri, a state that's been long, in my mind, long associated with interdistrict school choice, kind of on the forefront in some ways. But to show you that, again, local news is starting to cover these stories in a way television news people didn't before. So this is an interdistrict choice story from Missouri.
To open up School choice. Good evening, I'm Dylan Austin.
And I'm Mackenzie Henderson. Yeah, you could soon have more control over which school district your student attends. A bill making its way through the Missouri legislature would allow you to enroll your kids in other school districts.
But some local school administrators are concerned. WGEM's Frank Healy has been following this story. He is live in Lewis County, Missouri tonight with more. Frank?
Dylan and Mackenzie, if you live here in the Lewis County C1 school district, you'll likely go to the high school here at the Highland High School. But if this bill passes, you could potentially enroll in another school. It's an idea that administrators here say they don't necessarily like the idea of. Lewis County C1 Schools Superintendent John French says that if passed, movement from larger schools to middle-sized schools and smaller schools to middle-sized schools would likely be common. He says this would make it difficult to figure out staffing because students would be able to move in and out of the district more easily, especially for extracurriculars. While the latest version of the bill includes modifications for funding, he says there are still concerns about special education students and transportation. That's why French says they would opt out if the bill becomes law.
But that's really one-sided. Essentially, opting out only means that you will not take students from other school districts. Students from within your school district could still go to other schools.
Supporters of the bill, like Representative Brad Pollitt, thinks it's a step in the right direction for public education reform, saying it would help parents move their kids out of underperforming districts. The bill now goes to the Senate. Live in Lewis County, Missouri, Frank Healy, WGEM News.
Oh no! Some people might take my students out of my school. They're all gonna, we can't trap them. We can't trap them. In our school.
Yes. How can we can't plan as effectively if we let people leave like a jailbreak, like a prison left the door open. We let people leave. How do we plan our budget as accurately? We can plan our budget much easier if they're forced to stay against their will. Don't you see which is more important? Helping us plan our budget has to be considered higher priority than letting the kids go to a different. Anyway, the whole point is this is just intra-district school choice. This can't even be, attacked with those same old things of like, oh, private schools are unaccountable. This is actually between districts, and yet you get some of the same kind of reaction.
Yeah, you can choose your drink as long as it is a Pepsi. It's government school choice. You can only choose a particular.
As long as it's Pepsi from my store. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even though it's, you
can choose any grocery store as long as it's Safeway. Anyone, you can go to across town if you want. You can go to this one, but it has to be Safeway.
Well, no, this example is it has to be this location of Safeway. You can't go to the border of the next whatever area Safeway. It has to be this particular Safeway. Yeah, no, it's just funny to me to see that no matter what it is, it's going to be job protection, there's going to be fiefdoms, there's going to be turf protection, and just change the arguments to fit whatever to try to prevent choice.
So did you see what's happened in Texas? A 501c3 nonprofit group really stepped in it this past week. So there was an amendment to the budget that was proposed in Texas. And it was more so like a symbolic vote because all of the amendment was to say you can't put a school voucher bill into the budget. And they voted to mostly, they got a majority vote to not put a school voucher bill into the budget. And this group got really upset because and targeted specific legislators for not voting the way that they wanted. They were saying, these guys voted for school vouchers, which they didn't really. I mean, it was really they voted against prohibiting a school voucher bill to make its way into the budget. But
if I could just interject too, for those who don't know, a 501c3 is a particular government entity where you're allowed to do issue advocacy, but you're not supposed to support candidates and you're not supposed to support or oppose certain bills. So Choice Media, for example, my group is a 501c3. So we advocate for school choice, which is issue advocacy, but we don't advocate for or against candidates or bills.
Yep. So they went on their 501c3's official Twitter account. This wasn't an intern's Twitter account or someone who worked there's Twitter account. They used the official Twitter account to essentially engage in electioneering, saying we'll help you find someone to primary the people who didn't vote the way that we wanted. And they put specific names of legislators saying that you need to fire them if if they vote against this amendment. And there's several examples, which I'm going to go over in a second, but let's just go over the name of this group real quick. And they've been in the movement for a while. This is called Pastors for Texas Children.
Kids. Yeah,
and
okay.
their whole shtick is, hey, look, we're pastors. And I think it's just like one guy running the account, and they have their executive director. And he's like, I'm a pastor, and even I am against private school vouchers. We should only be for public schools that can't teach religion. It seems like a parody account, because their whole thing is not allowing a mechanism for students to attend private, which can be religious schools, and they come out hard against it, and that's their whole thing. But yeah, that's the name of the organization. And this guy Mark McCaig actually filed a complaint to the IRS, pretty much saying, you're abusing your 501c3 tax exempt status. You can't engage in electioneering the way that you've been doing over the past week or more. And so if you just scroll down their timeline, you can see a bunch of examples of this. For example, and it was mostly around the time of the budget. They're advocating for specific policies, which they can do, I believe, if they're a 501c4. I don't think they are. So they called out Cato Institute, myself, and Betsy DeVos. They got mad at us. But before all of that started, so they have this post. We're searching for candidates to oppose these Texas legislators who support the corrupt policy of private school vouchers. We will no longer placate this wrong position. Good people, yes, bad policy. They must not run unopposed, primary or general. And they listed all the people that they're calling to primary. So that's just one tweet. They retweeted it a couple of times. But here's another one. No state representative voting against this amendment should return. Find winnable Republican and Democratic candidates to oppose them. Make them pay for it. Listed their names again. Here's another tweet coming up. They list people's names. Here's hashtag 2022 elections. You've got there's more coming. Just wait. Listed people's names again, which is fine. But here's another one. Here's the vote. They listed the vote and said, here, fire the 29 for betraying their oath before God, is pretty much what they said.
And again, there's nothing illegal about opposing school choice, although we disagree.
You can, but
you can do that as a C3. That's fine. The problem is this part about
another one
opposing candidates.
Here's another one. Any Republican in the House voting against vouchers today will be challenged in 2020 election primary in general. Strap in, y'all, voucher. And then they also had another one. Okay, so I'll just end with this one. There's a bunch more, but this is like the fifth or sixth that I've already gone over. But look, any Texas House member voting against the Herrero Amendment, and by the way, I'm quoting all of these things. I'm not saying this myself because I want to engage in this type of activity. All of these things are quotes from the Pastors for Texas Children Twitter account. Any Texas legislator, House member voting against the Herrero Amendment prohibiting any will have a challenger in 2022 elections. They said this is not a threat, that is a promise. So they're outright threatening essentially candidates, saying if you vote this way
against the Herrero Amendment, against a certain amendment, that's legislation. That's taking a position in legislation, which is in violation of C3 policy.
And so a couple of people have posted, including this Mark guy, saying I filed a complaint. And a couple of other people have filed complaints, I believe, as well. And other people have called them out on Twitter as well, saying, you're not allowed to do this. I'm actually kind of surprised they haven't gone back and deleted these tweets, because that's a problem. They've got a problem.
Yes, they've exhibited as much care regarding failure to delete tweets as they did in tweeting in the first place, right? They're consistent, at least, with their precision. In our remaining moments, I wanted to talk about, we talk about this a lot. There's a lot of sexual abuse in public schools around the country. We have a domain called sexualabuseinschools.org. Well, there's a particular, I don't want to sound like I'm obsessed with this stuff, but when there's a particularly egregious story, that's when it actually makes it into our general choice media newswire. And that happened last week. And so this is about a North Carolina principal, and there was local news coverage of that.
Kirk Ashton, the principal at Hilton's Northwood Elementary School, is accused of sexually abusing multiple children. He was arraigned this evening at Greasetown Court. This is video of police walking him out of the town court. You can see he's in handcuffs and then placing him into a squad car. All of this happening this evening. Jack Watson joins us now live from outside Greasetown Court, where Ashton was arraigned tonight. Jack, what did we learn?
Adam, tonight we learned that these are very serious charges dating back several years, and prosecutors say there are 9 separate male victims. We are told the charges include course of sexual conduct against a child in the 2nd degree and sexual abuse in the 1st degree. Those are both violent felonies. The Hilton School District also releasing a statement tonight saying in part, quote, "Our primary concern is for our students. Our district crisis team has formulated a plan to support students and staff, and counselors are available for students throughout the day." Last week, the district told its community it placed Ashton on administrative leave from his position as Northwood Elementary School principal. What you are seeing now is video we took of Ashton during a separate story years ago. An assistant DA with the Monroe County District Attorney's Office spoke with us about the charges tonight.
Certainly, anytime someone is in authority is charged with something like this, it would be a shock. But I think what certainly Amanda and I know from doing this for a long time, that the overwhelming majority of sex abuse happens from someone that children know, love, and trust.
Again, the assistant district attorney saying there are 9 separate victims here, but would not speculate on how many total there would be. Live in Greece, Jack Watson, News 8.
All right, Jack, thank you. Now, a few other notes here about this case. Ashton is being held on $500,000 bail, $1 million bond. 8 orders of protection were issued for the alleged victims this evening. Also, Kirk Ashton has been a principal at Northwood since 2004. He was assistant principal at an elementary school in Rush Henrietta before that, and a special ed teacher at Crestwood Children's Center before that.
So I just bring this up. 9 victims is an unusual type of story in this genre, but we chronicle these stories all the time in our sexualabuseinschools.org list. But just to say, for those who don't believe in school choice, it's not so much about once they catch someone like this, what the wheels of justice do after. It's the stories that we don't catch, and it's the stories before you catch people like this. Imagine those 9 students maybe wanting another school choice option after this situation had started with them, and yet not having enough supply of school choice in a state that does have school vouchers, North Carolina already, and charter schools. But imagine not having enough supply of school choice to help those students. So it's yet another argument along the lines we made.
Mm-hmm. I thought you were going to bring up how you have these stories shown on the Choice Media website. I think you have a new strand of stories that are at the Choice Media website as well. Is it? Do you have other categories like this as well?
Well, there's a critical race theory RSS we started, and there you have it there. So these are expanding across the country too, these kinds of stories. And we've talked before about this concept of whether anti-racism may, according to some, become racism, where it becomes a case where some school districts are trying using policies, disparate impact analyses, where they say, based on these certain percentages, based on race of kids achieving this or that, we now need to equalize that by reducing the performance of academic performance of certain kids based on race in an attempt to be anti-racist. And in so doing, it is argued by many people that this is actually turning into racism, where they are judging children by the color of their skin. And the way many people grow up, like me, was that it's wrong to judge people by the color of their skin. Well, if you package this under the new umbrella branded as anti-racism, that doesn't make it any better to judge children or people by the color of their skin. And so this is a new genre of story we're seeing pop around the country generally labeled under critical race theory. And yeah, people can find that. It's on our website. You can find it under choicemedia.tv, as I see there, /tag/critical-race-theory.
And it looks like there's also, we are tracking a lot of the school choice bills. There seems to be a higher number of bills calling to ban critical race theory in public schools in different states. So it looks like there's one in Idaho.
Yes, generally in red states, you're seeing some of that happen, where they're saying, look, just don't judge anyone by the color of skin. Now what, advocates of these policies, to give that side, they will say, well, what if racism has become more subtle in the 21st century. You can't wait till you find somebody sounding like a Klan member or a Nazi. You have sometimes, if it's subtle, then it's hard to actually catch direct incidents of someone espousing a racist policy. And therefore, since it's subtle, the only way to redress racism that's subtle is to look for these general trends and then reverse those general trends. Well, again, the other side is to say you can create a new form of racism now by simply trying to hurt kids because they are the privileged classes or the various races. Oftentimes, Asians have been getting into elite Ivy League universities at higher rates than anyone else, any other races. And so there's some debate about whether to artificially reduce the percentage of Asians regardless of their performance on tests and applications, et cetera. So it's an ongoing debate, of course. I think I'm pretty much been clear where I stand on it, but we're also, just by aggregating these into a new section of Choice Media that you just described, we are allowing more sunlight to fall onto this discussion.
Yeah, I think there are legit arguments to be made on either side, whether it comes to having one curriculum over another. I think there are better ways to teach certain things, and maybe it's okay to teach it if you're saying it in a certain way and not saying that you're an evil person, this 5-year-old kid, that you're an evil person just because of the way that you look. I think that's probably a problem. But I think the best solution, because it's such a highly contentious issue and people disagree on it and how it should be taught, the best solution is to just let people choose schools based on, well, if I want to teach that stuff at home, maybe I'll teach it at home and I'll have the school that focuses on other things, or maybe I'll have a school that is teaching those same concepts, but in a fair way and a way that seems less like indoctrination and more so illumination.
There's a gender version of this too, by the way. There was a school in Australia where all the little boys were asked to apologize to the little girls for toxic masculinity. And that actually happened. They actually had these little toddler boys who've done nothing wrong literally make apologies to all the little toddler girls for masculinity, essentially. It really happened. And then they apologized later and then, hit the press. Only after it hit the press, of course.
And you know what? We say a lot of the times on this podcast that keeping the schools closed fueled the fire behind school choice in the past year. But I think a lot of it is also parents saying, what the heck is going on in my child's school? They're telling them what? They're teaching this? Oh, no way. And that matters a lot more to a lot of parents than standardized test scores. And so because of the remote learning and increased use of social media and viral videos, I think more parents are starting to see that, well, this doesn't really align with my values. Why should I have to pay for this school that's indoctrinating my kid in a way that I inherently disagree with? Why not just let me take my children's education dollars elsewhere? So I think that's also fueled the support for school choice over the past year.
Yeah. And I make this solemn pledge to our viewers that I will follow up with whatever this Chicago story was that was on the tip of my brain that I didn't quite get right. The next episode, this is a tease, they call it in television. The next Random Assignment episode will be the Bob Bowden either apology tour or confirmation data regarding the Chicago story.
It must be my fault. I'm just not good at searching for things on the fly. But before we go, I want to do one more 30-second clip of a private school principal in Pennsylvania, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the principal of Bishop McCourt High School, they've been open in person for essentially the entire time. And he gave testimony in front of the Pennsylvania legislature in support of expanding, I believe, a tax credit scholarship school choice program out there.
Bishop McCourt did both because we have a group of staff members that put students first. Our teachers took the approach that they are essential. And not only did they say it, they proved it and taught in person while also conducting temperature checks and screenings at the door when the students entered. We abided by COVID protocol and took all necessary precautions for our students, staff, and faculty.
So he went on and continued to say that school choices will make more people win, that, look, there's a lot of people just across the street that would like to come to our school, but they don't have the financial means to do so. Expanding school choice would allow more families to access our school and others. And a lot of the public schools, the kids are having a gap year. He went on to say how their kids aren't having a gap year, and other families should have opportunities too. But I thought the money quote was, our teachers took the approach that they were essential, and they proved it by going back to work. They didn't just say it, they did it.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've had the good taste to spend the last hour watching or listening to Random Assignment. Please share it with a friend. I don't know, maybe a friend of yours might be interested in this production. And I am Bob Bowden with Choice Media. That is Corey DeAngelis with American Federation for Children and the Reason Foundation. And we'll see you next time.
Yep. See you guys next week. Random Assignment.